The massive holographic display filled the entire wall of Conference Room 7, aboard Nexus Station. Ambassador Zethkar of the Kelvani Trade Union stood before it with his forearms crossed behind his back. His green-scaled skin reflected the blue light from thousands of star systems that dotted the three-dimensional map. Trade routes appeared as golden threads connecting worlds across the galaxy. Diplomatic territories glowed in different colors, showing the domains of over 200 different species. But there was something wrong with the map. Something that had bothered Zethkar for decades of diplomatic service. In the lower spiral arm of the galaxy sat a perfect sphere of empty space. No trade routes crossed through it. No exploration missions had ever mapped its interior. No diplomatic contact had been established with whatever lived inside that dark region. The map simply ended at its borders as if someone had taken an eraser to that entire section of space. Zethkar had been staring at that empty region for 20 minutes when his aide, Vrex, shuffled into the room. The younger Kelvani carried a datapad clutched against his chest and his tail twitched nervously. "Honored Ambassador," Vrex said in their native tongue, "the human delegation has arrived at Docking Bay 12. The words hit Zethkar like ice water. He had been dreading this meeting for weeks ever since the humans had requested formal negotiations. Every species in the galaxy conducted business with every other species. Trade agreements, territory disputes, mining rights, shipping contracts. It was the foundation of galactic civilization, every species except one. "How many ships did they bring?" Zethkar asked. "Just one, sir. A small diplomatic vessel called the Harmony. Captain Jake Morrison commanding with Lieutenant Amy Collins as his diplomatic aide." Zethkar nodded slowly. At least they had not brought one of their larger vessels. The last time a human warship had docked at Nexus Station 3 months ago, half the diplomatic quarter had emptied within hours. Species had found urgent business elsewhere in the galaxy. Even the hegemony representatives had quietly departed. "What do they want to discuss?" Zethkar asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Mining rights in the Outer Rim sectors, sir. Standard commercial negotiations. Nothing about humans was ever standard." Zethkar had been a diplomat for 40 years. He had negotiated with the war-loving Krex whose idea of diplomacy involved ritual combat. He had brokered peace between the hive-minded Xanthari and the individualistic Altarians whose very thought processes were incompatible. He had even survived trade talks with the void merchants who existed partially outside normal space-time. But humans made him nervous in ways he could not explain. "Send word that we will meet them in Conference Room 3 in 1 hour, Zethkar said, "and Vrex, make sure the emergency protocols are updated, sir. Nothing specific, just make sure they are current." Vrex left and Zethkar returned to studying the map. He zoomed in on the empty sphere that dominated the lower spiral arm. The computer labeled it simply as Uncharted Region, but every diplomat in the galaxy knew what it really was. Human space, the borders were clearly defined. A perfect sphere roughly 800 light-years in diameter. No species had ever been inside and returned to tell about it. More troubling, no species had ever been invited inside. The humans conducted all their business at border stations or neutral territory like Nexus Station. Zethkar pulled up historical records on his personal tablet. The humans had made first contact with galactic civilization about 50 years ago. A small exploration vessel had arrived at a hegemony outpost requesting fuel and supplies. The crew had been polite, paid in rare minerals, and left without incident. That should have been the beginning of standard diplomatic relations. But it was not. Instead, the humans had simply announced the boundaries of their territory and requested that other species not attempt to cross those borders. They offered no explanation. They provided no details about their government structure, population, or military capabilities. They simply drew a line in space and asked everyone else to respect it. The galaxy had been curious, of course. The hegemony sent exploration missions to map human space. None returned. The trade union dispatched diplomatic envoys to establish formal contact. They returned back at the border with polite but firm refusals. Even the void merchants who could travel through dimensions that normal species could not perceive had been unable to penetrate human territory. After a few years, the galaxy had simply accepted the situation. Humans existed. They controlled a large territory and they occasionally emerged to conduct limited business. It was unusual but not unprecedented. Some species were naturally isolationist, but there were the rumors. Rex returned exactly 1 hour later. The humans have arrived, sir. They are waiting in conference room 3. Zethkar straightened his formal diplomatic robes and checked that his universal translator was functioning properly. He had dealt with thousands of species over his career. Humans could not be that different. Conference room 3 was smaller than the main assembly hall, but still impressive. A long oval table made from Altarian crystal dominated the center. Holographic displays could be activated at any seat. The walls showed a peaceful view of Nexus Station's exterior, with ships coming and going from hundreds of docking bays. 2 humans sat at the far end of the table. Captain Jake Morrison was a tall man with short brown hair and calm blue eyes. He wore a simple, dark blue uniform with minimal decoration. Lieutenant Amy Collins sat beside him reviewing data on a tablet. She was shorter, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical style. They both stood when Zethkar entered. Morrison extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. Zethkar shook it carefully. Human hands were surprisingly strong. Ambassador Zethkar, Morrison said with a smile, "Thank you for meeting with us. I am Captain Jake Morrison of the Human Diplomatic Corps, and this is Lieutenant Amy Collins. Welcome to Nexus Station, Captain Morrison." Zethkar replied, settling into his chair. "I understand you wish to discuss mining rights in the Outer Rim. That is correct." Collins said, activating a holographic display. "We have identified several asteroid fields rich in rare elements that would be valuable for both our species." The presentation was professional and straightforward. The humans had indeed located valuable mining sites in unclaimed territory. Their proposals were fair and their terms reasonable. It should have been a simple negotiation. But Zethkar found himself studying the humans more than their data. They seemed so ordinary. Morrison occasionally sipped water from a simple container. Collins took notes on a basic tablet. They asked sensible questions and made reasonable counteroffers. Yet something about them made Zethkar's scales itch with unease. "Captain Morrison," Zethkar said during a pause in the negotiations, "I noticed that our star charts seem to have a gap where your territory is located." The room became very quiet. Morrison and Collins exchanged a quick glance. When Morrison looked back at Zethkar, his smile had not changed, but something in his eyes had shifted. "Our space is clearly marked on all standard navigation charts," Morrison said evenly. "We simply prefer to handle our own internal mapping." "Of course," Zethkar said quickly. "I meant no offense. It is simply unusual for such a large territory to be excluded from galactic survey data. Every species has their own preferences, Ambassador." Collins said, "The Void Merchants do not share details about their dimensional routes. The hive worlds keep their internal structure classified. We simply value our privacy." It was a reasonable explanation, but it did not explain why 3 different species had quietly evacuated their nearest outposts after human ships had been spotted in nearby systems. It did not explain why the hegemony had classified all information about their early contact attempts. It did not explain why trade captains would take longer routes that added weeks to their journeys, rather than pass near the borders of human space. Morrison leaned forward slightly. "Is there something specific about our territory that concerns you, Ambassador?" The question was polite, but Zethkar felt a chill run through his scales. There was something in the human's tone, something that suggested this was not merely a casual inquiry. "Not at all, Captain." Zethkar said, "I was simply making conversation." "Of course," Morrison said, and his smile returned to its previous warmth. "Now about those mining rights." The negotiations concluded 2 hours later with a preliminary agreement. The humans would extract rare minerals from specified asteroid fields. The Kelvani Trade Union would provide shipping and distribution services. Both sides would split the profits according to a complex formula that Amy Collins had calculated with impressive speed, as though the humans prepared to leave Zethkar made one final attempt at casual conversation. "Captain Morrison, if you do not mind my asking, how large is your territory exactly?" Morrison paused at the doorway. For just a moment his pleasant expression seemed to flicker. When he answered, his voice carried a weight that had not been there during the business discussions. "Large enough, Ambassador," he said. "Large enough for what we need to do." After the humans left, Zethkar sat alone in the conference room staring at the holographic display that still showed their mining proposal. Everything about the meeting had been normal, professional, routine. So why did he feel like he had just negotiated with something far more dangerous than it appeared? Outside his window, a human ship detack. 3 cycles had passed since the diplomatic meeting between Ambassador Zethkar and the human delegation. Life aboard Nexus Station had returned to its normal rhythm of trade negotiations, cultural exchanges, and the endless flow of ships from across the galaxy. The central marketplace buzzed with activity as dozens of species conducted business in a dozen different languages. Kixara stepped off the transport shuttle from her home world of Altair Prime with wide eyes and barely contained excitement. This was her first assignment beyond her home system. At 23 standard years, she was young even by Altarian standards. Her silver skin had the bright metallic sheen that marked her as inexperienced in interstellar affairs. Her mentor had warned her that diplomatic service would challenge everything she thought she knew about the galaxy. She had no idea how right he would be. Her quarters were small but comfortable in the junior diplomatic section of the station. After settling her few belongings, she reported to her assigned supervisor. Quindal was ancient even by Zelthran standards. His 6-limbed frame moved slowly, but his 4 compound eyes missed nothing. His scaled hide had faded to the pale green that marked a Zelthran who had lived for over 2 centuries. "Welcome to Nexus Station, young Altarian," Quindal said in perfectly accented universal standard. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Yes, honored Quindal," Kixara replied, using the formal address her training had drilled into her. "I am eager to begin my service." "Patience is the first lesson of diplomacy," the elder alien said, settling behind his curved desk. "You have much to learn about how things work here. Many species, many customs, many unspoken rules." Kixara nodded politely, but her attention was drawn to the massive holographic star map that dominated one wall of Quindal's office. It showed the same galactic overview she had studied during her diplomatic training. Hundreds of trade routes connected thousands of systems across 3 spiral arms. Each species' territory was clearly marked in different colors, except for one region. In the lower spiral arm sat a perfect sphere of empty space. Her training materials had mentioned it briefly as an administrative gap in the standard charts. But seeing it here in 3 dimensions, she realized how enormous it was. The empty region was larger than the territories of the 5 major powers combined. "Honored Quindal," she said, pointing at the dark sphere. "What species controls that territories?" Old Zelthran's eyes blinked in a complex sequence. In Zeltron body language, it meant extreme discomfort. "That region is not currently mapped for standard diplomatic purposes, but it is huge," Kixara said, pulling up detailed measurements on the display. "It contains over 3,000 star systems. Surely someone must live there. Some regions of space are best left to those who inhabit them," Quindal said firmly. "Your duties here will involve the cataloged territories only." Kixara wanted to ask more questions, but something in her supervisor's tone warned her to drop the subject. She spent the rest of the day reviewing assignment protocols and meeting other junior diplomats from various species. But her mind kept returning to that enormous empty space on the galactic map. That evening, she visited the station's central database to research the mysterious region. The public records contained almost nothing, a few references to sector designation pending and administrative review in progress, but no actual information. It was as if someone had deliberately scrubbed all data about that entire region of space. Her security clearance as a junior diplomat gave her access to slightly more detailed records. Here she found references to something called human space, but the entries were brief and uninformative. Humans were listed as a minor species with limited diplomatic contact. Population unknown. Government structure unknown. Military capabilities unknown. For a species that apparently controlled territory larger than the hegemony itself, the humans seemed remarkably invisible. 3 days later, Kixara was reviewing trade reports in the station's market district when she overheard a conversation that changed everything. 2 cargo haulers from different species were discussing shipping routes over drinks at a corner table. "The Centauri run pays well, but I am not taking it," said a Krex trader whose red-scaled hide marked him as a clan warrior turned merchant. "Why not?" asked his companion, a blob-like Aquarian whose translator gave his speech a wet, bubbling quality. The route is safe and profitable. It passes too close to human space. The Krex said, lowering his voice. I have family to think about. Humans, the Aquarian scoffed. I have never even seen one. Are they really so dangerous? You have lived a sheltered life then, the Krex replied. 3 months ago, a human warship docked here. Half the diplomatic quarter emptied within hours. Species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly found reasons to cooperate rather than risk catching human attention. But what do they actually do that makes everyone so afraid? The Krex was quiet for a long moment. No one talks about it, but my grandfather hauled cargo during the border wars 40 years ago. He told me stories before he died. Stories about entire pirate fleets that would just disappear when they got too close to human territory. Not destroyed, not captured. Just gone. Gone how? No debris, no distress signals, no survivors. Like they had never existed at all. Kixara strained to hear more, but the conversation shifted to safer topics like cargo manifests and fuel prices. She returned to her duties with her mind racing. Every species in the galaxy seemed to know something about humans that was not in any official record. That night she used her diplomatic access codes to search deeper into the restricted archives. What she found made her stomach twist with unease. Buried in classified files were fragments of reports from various species' intelligence services. A hegemony exploration mission to the border of human space had filed this report. Vessels turned back at coordinate junction 7749. Human patrol. Ship advised that passage was not recommended for our safety. When pressed for details, the human captain stated, quote, Our pest control operations in this sector may present hazards to civilian traffic, unquote. Mission aborted. A trade union cargo convoy had submitted this incident report. Course alteration. Required when human vessel USS Liberty approached convoy near Sector 7. Captain Ryan Bell was cordial and professional. Offered assistance with navigation. Casually mentioned, quote, We just finished cleaning up some trouble in the asteroid fields, unquote. When asked for specifics, Captain Bell replied, quote, Nothing your species needs to worry about, unquote. Convoy diverted to alternate route as precaution. The most disturbing report came from a Void merchant scout. Attempted dimensional shift into human space blocked by unknown technology. Probe signals indicate massive energy signatures throughout the region. Signatures consistent with large-scale military operations. Recommend immediate classification of all data regarding human activities. Further investigation inadvisable. Kixara sat back in her chair trying to process what she had read. The fragments painted a picture of a species that was not just isolationist, but actively engaged in some kind of massive ongoing military operation, an operation so significant that they casually warned other species away from entire sectors of space. But military operation against what? The galaxy had been at peace for over a century. The last major conflict had been the Krex expansion wars, and that had ended when the Krex themselves had joined the galactic community. The next morning, Kixara decided to try a more direct approach. She had noticed that human ships occasionally docked at Nexus Station for supplies and routine maintenance. According to the docking logs, a human vessel called the Pioneer was scheduled to arrive that afternoon. She positioned herself in the main observation lounge that overlooked the primary docking bays. When the Pioneer arrived, she watched it carefully. The ship looked like a standard exploration vessel. Clean lines, efficient design, no obvious weapons. The crew that disembarked wore simple uniforms and went about their business with quiet professionalism. Captain Ellen Hayes was tall with short brown hair and calm green eyes. She supervised the loading of supplies with the same casual efficiency that any ship captain might show. Nothing about her or her crew seemed particularly threatening, but Kixara noticed something odd. The normal bustle of activity around the docking bay had quietly diminished. Maintenance crews worked faster than usual. Other ships requested priority departure clearance. Within 2 hours, the usually busy docking area was nearly empty, except for the Pioneer and its crew. Kixara made her decision. She walked down to the docking level and approached Captain Hayes, who was reviewing a manifest on her tablet. Excuse me, Captain, Kixara said. I am Junior Diplomat Kixara from the Altarian Diplomatic Corps. Welcome to Nexus Station. Hayes looked up with a pleasant smile. Thank you. I am Captain Ellen Hayes. Is there something I can help you with? I was hoping you might answer some questions about human space, Kixara said, for my diplomatic files. Hayes's expression remained friendly, but something subtle shifted in her eyes. What kind of questions? Basic information. Population estimates, major trade goods, diplomatic contact procedures. I see, Hayes said, setting down her tablet. You know our space is clearly marked on all navigation charts. We prefer to handle our own internal affairs. It was almost exactly what Captain Morrison had told Ambassador Zethkar 3 cycles ago. Kixara pressed on. Oh! The transport ship carrying Kixara to her new assignment in the Outer Rim territories was old and slow. She had 3 days to think about what had happened at Nexus Station. 3 days to wonder why asking simple questions about human space had resulted in her immediate reassignment to the furthest possible posting from human territory. During the long journey, she used her portable data terminal to access what little information was publicly available about humans. The official records were sparse and seemed deliberately vague. First contact had occurred 52 years ago, when a human exploration vessel had requested supplies at a hegemony outpost. Since then, humans had established clear territorial boundaries and conducted limited trade with other species. What bothered Kixara was not what the records contained, but what they did not contain. No population estimates, no descriptions of human government or culture, no technical specifications for their ships, no trade statistics beyond basic commodity exchanges. For a species that controlled one of the largest territories in the galaxy, humans were remarkably invisible in official documentation. Her new posting was on Frontier Station 12, a small diplomatic outpost that served the scattered colonies of the Outer Rim. The station commander was a middle-aged Fentari named Bluxom, whose tentacles twitched constantly with nervous energy. He greeted Kixara with obvious relief at having another diplomatic officer to share the workload. Welcome to the frontier, Bluxom said as he showed her to her quarters. It is quiet here, but the work is important. We help resolve disputes between colonies and coordinate resource-sharing agreements. Kixara settled into her new routine quickly. The work was indeed quiet compared to the bustling activity of Nexus Station. Most of her duties involved mediating minor disagreements between farming colonies or negotiating shipping contracts for rare minerals. It should have been boring, but she found the peaceful predictability almost relaxing after her confusing experience with human mysteries. 2 months into her assignment, Kixara was reviewing colony production reports when her terminal chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender was identified as the Hegemony Deep Archive Division, a department she had never heard of. The message itself was brief and coded in a way that suggested extreme security classification. Officer Kixara, your recent research queries have been flagged for follow-up review. Report to Archive Terminal 7 for classified briefing at your earliest convenience. Access code, Theta 97 Alpha. Kixara stared at the message in confusion. She had not submitted any research queries since arriving at Frontier Station 12. Then she realized that the message must refer to her investigation into human space records while she was at Nexus Station. Someone had been monitoring her database access and decided it required attention. Archive Terminal 7 turned out to be hidden in the deepest section of the station's data core. Kixara had to navigate through multiple security checkpoints and biometric scanners before reaching a small chamber that contained only a single computer interface. When she entered the access code, the terminal came to life with warnings about classified information and the severe penalties for unauthorized disclosure. What appeared on the screen made her understand why such security was necessary. The files contained detailed reports from the Hegemony's First Contact Division dating back 50 years. Unlike the sanitized public records these documents told, a very different story about humanity's arrival in galactic civilization. The first report described the initial encounter with a human exploration vessel at Hegemony Outpost 47. The human ship had been damaged and requested emergency repairs. The outpost commander had been happy to assist as part of standard first contact protocols. But during the 3 days required for repairs, the humans had displayed capabilities that had deeply unsettled the hegemony personnel. The human chief engineer completed modifications to their reactor that our technical staff estimate should have required weeks of work, the report stated. When asked to explain their methods, the engineer simply said they had experience with similar problems. Their medical officer treated injuries using techniques unknown to our databases. Most disturbing, their captain displayed knowledge of local stellar phenomena that should not have been available to an exploration vessel from outside our region. Follow-up. Reports detailed the hegemony's attempts to establish formal diplomatic relations. 3 separate missions had been sent to map human space and establish embassy contact. All 3 had encountered the same result. Human patrol vessels had intercepted them at the territorial border and politely but firmly turned them back. The human explanation had been consistent. This region is under active administration. Transit by civilian vessels is not recommended for safety reasons. When pressed for details about what kind of administrative activities required such security, the human responses had been vague but troubling. References to ongoing operations and containment protocols and perimeter maintenance that suggested large-scale military activities. One hegemony intelligence officer had submitted this analysis. Human territorial claims appear to extend beyond normal space-time. Long-range sensors detect energy signatures consistent with dimensional manipulation technology. Scale of operations suggests either massive industrial development or preparation for major military conflict. Recommend immediate classification of all human-related intelligence. The most disturbing report came from a joint scientific expedition that had approached human space 3 years ago. The expedition had been studying unusual gravitational anomalies in the region when they encountered a human warship. The interaction had been brief, but memorable. Captain Lisa Grant of the human vessel Pioneer advised our expedition to withdraw from the area immediately, the report stated. When our science officer, Dr. Fexetar, inquired about the nature of the gravitational disturbances, Captain Grant replied, quote, "Those are not natural phenomena, Doctor, and they are not your concern," unquote. Our sensor readings indicated the presence of massive artificial structures throughout the region, structures that appeared to extend into parallel dimensions. The expedition leader had filed this conclusion. Evidence suggests humans are engaged in large-scale engineering projects that manipulate fundamental forces of physics. Purpose unknown. But scope indicates technological capabilities far beyond current galactic norms. Recommend extreme caution in all future human contact. Kixara sat back from the terminal feeling overwhelmed. The classified reports painted a picture of humanity that was completely different from their public image as a quiet, isolationist species. According to intelligence analysis, they possessed technology that could manipulate space-time itself and were engaged in mysterious operations across multiple dimensions. But operations against what? And why did they work so hard to keep other species from learning about it? The final document in the archive provided a partial answer. It was a report from the Void Merchants, the enigmatic traders who existed partially outside normal reality and could travel through dimensions that other species could not perceive. Even they had been unable to penetrate human space, but they had observed activities from adjacent dimensional planes. Human operations extend across at least 17 parallel dimensional layers. The Void Merchant report stated, large-scale construction projects apparent throughout the region. Purpose appears to be defensive rather than expansionist. Recommend avoiding all contact with human activities. Some barriers are not meant to be crossed. The report concluded with a warning that made Kixara's skin crawl. Detection of massive predatory entities in deep dimensional space adjacent to human territory. Entities appear to be contained by human defensive structures. Strongly advise against any actions that might compromise human containment operations. Kixara read that last line 3 times to make sure she understood it correctly. The Void Merchants were suggesting that humans were not just hiding their territory from other species. They were actively fighting something dangerous enough that even beings who existed outside normal reality were afraid of it. The terminal automatically logged her out after she finished reading. A final message appeared warning her. that the information she had accessed was classified at the highest levels, and that disclosure would result in severe legal consequences. But the message also contained a personal note that chilled her. Officer Kixara, your natural curiosity is understandable, but some knowledge carries responsibilities that can destroy those unprepared to bear them. The galaxy maintains certain deliberate ignorances for the protection of all species. Trust that there are those who stand watch in dangerous places so that others may sleep safely. Do not seek to wake what others work to keep sleeping. Walking back to her quarters, Kixara felt as if her entire understanding of the galaxy had been turned upside down. The peaceful civilization she had grown up in apparently existed because somewhere in the empty regions of the star maps, humans were fighting battles against things so terrible that even their existence was kept secret. She thought about Captain Ellen Hayes and her casual mention of appropriate training and equipment for handling special administrative requirements. She thought about the Krex traders' story of pirate fleets that simply disappeared near human space. She thought about the energy sign. Commander Lisa Grant had been looking forward to a quiet resupply stop at Nexus Station. The Pioneer had been on deep space patrol for 6 months and her crew deserved some shore leave. The routine visit should have taken no more than 2 days to load supplies and submit navigation reports to the Galactic Shipping Authority, but nothing involving humans was ever truly routine. The first sign of trouble came when the Pioneer received priority docking clearance despite having requested standard civilian berthing. Traffic control guided them to Docking Bay 7, one of the premium military-grade facilities usually reserved for hegemony warships or trade union security vessels. They are treating us like visiting dignitaries again, said her first officer, Lieutenant Kevin Stone, as they watched the unusually empty docking bay through the viewport, or something they want to keep separate from regular traffic. Grant replied, checking her manifest one more time. Just handle the resupply requests and try to keep interactions minimal. Grant had been commanding deep space missions for 8 years. She understood the delicate balance required when humans interacted with other species. Too much contact raised uncomfortable questions. Too little contact raised different but equally problematic suspicions. The key was to appear exactly as ordinary as possible. Unfortunately, the Pioneer was many things, but ordinary was not one of them. The ship looked like a standard exploration vessel from the outside. Clean lines, efficient design, no obvious weapon systems. But appearances could be deeply misleading. The Pioneer's hull contained metamaterial composites that could absorb energy across 17 different dimensional frequencies. Her engines could shift between normal space and parallel dimensional layers. Her sensor arrays could detect temporal disturbances and probability fluctuations. Most importantly, her cargo holds contained equipment that no civilian exploration vessel should ever need. Grant disembarked with a standard crew, complement for shore leave, while the rest remained aboard to oversee supply loading. She had hoped to complete the necessary paperwork quickly and depart before anyone took too much interest in their activities. That hope died when she encountered the Nexus Administrator. Bluxom was a Fentari whose nervous energy usually made him talkative and eager to please visiting ship captains. But when Grant approached his office to file her departure documents, she found him unusually quiet. His tentacles writhed with anxiety and his skin had shifted to the pale yellow that indicated extreme stress. Commander Grant, he said without his usual enthusiastic greeting, I trust your resupply operations are proceeding smoothly. Very smoothly, Administrator, Grant replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. We should be ready to depart by tomorrow morning. Excellent, Bluxom said, but his relief was so obvious it was almost insulting. And your destination? Grant had been dreading this question. Her actual destination was classified far beyond anything Nexus Station personnel were cleared to know. But she needed to file some kind of flight plan to avoid raising suspicions. We are heading toward the Andromeda Gateway, she said. Routine stellar cartography mission. It was not technically a lie. They were indeed headed toward the Andromeda Gateway region. The fact that they would be making several stops in parallel dimensional space along the way was simply not mentioned. Bluxom's tentacles stopped writhing quite so violently. The Andromeda Gateway. Yes, that is far from here, very far. Though perhaps you might consider the Triangulum Passage instead. Grant studied the administrator's face carefully. The Triangulum Passage would add 6 months to our journey. Is there some problem with the direct route? The pale yellow of Bluxom's skin deepened to an almost white shade. Not a problem exactly, but the direct route passes through the void sectors. Very isolated region. If you encountered any difficulties, there would be no one to assist you. Grant felt a familiar chill. The void sectors were indeed isolated. They were also directly adjacent to one of the most active containment zones in human space. If Bluxom was trying to steer her away from that region, it meant someone knew more about human operations than they should. We appreciate your concern, Administrator, Grant said, keeping her voice pleasantly neutral. But the Pioneer is well equipped for independent operations. We rarely require assistance. Something in her tone made Bluxom lean back in his chair. For a moment, Grant saw a flicker of genuine fear cross his features. Of course, Commander, he said quickly. I am sure your crew is very capable. It is just that the void sectors have been showing unusual gravitational anomalies recently. Nothing dangerous, but possibly confusing for navigation. Grant nodded politely, but her mind was racing. Gravitational anomalies in the void sectors meant the containment grids were active, which meant something was testing the barriers again, which meant her mission timeline had just become much more urgent. Thank you for the warning, she said. We will monitor our sensors carefully. She left Bluxom's office with her departure documents approved, but her concern level significantly elevated. The administrator's nervous behavior suggested that information about human activities was leaking, despite all security protocols. That was troubling but not unprecedented. More worrying was his specific knowledge of anomalies in the void sectors. Grant made her way to the station's market district where her crew was enjoying their shore leave. She found them at a quiet bar popular with cargo haulers and independent traders. Lieutenant Stone was nursing a drink and watching the crowd, with the professional alertness that never quite left human military personnel. Any problems? She asked. Settling beside him at the bar, nothing major. Stone replied, but people are giving us more space than usual. Even the Kreks are avoiding eye contact. Grant looked around the bar and realized he was right. The usual mixing of species that characterized Nexus Station's social areas was notably absent. Different species had quietly separated themselves into distinct groups with a clear empty zone around the human officers. How long has this been going on? She asked. Started about an hour after we docked, Stone said. Word travels fast on a station this size. Before Grant could respond, a young Altarian female approached their table. She moved with the careful precision of someone who had been drinking, but was trying not to show it. Her silver skin had the bright metallic sheen of youth, and her eyes held the kind of desperate curiosity that Grant had learned to recognize as dangerous. Excuse me, the Altarian said. I am Kixara from the Diplomatic Corps. I was hoping to ask you some questions about human space. The bar became noticeably quieter. Grant saw several species quietly signal for their tabs and prepare to leave. This was exactly the kind of situation she had hoped to avoid. I am Commander Grant, she replied carefully. What kind of questions? Basic information for diplomatic files, Kixara said, though her slight unsteadiness suggested this was not an official inquiry. Population estimates, government structure, trade policies. Grant exchanged a quick glance with Stone. The lieutenant's hand had moved casually closer to his sidearm, not threatening but ready. Our space is clearly marked on all navigation charts, Grant said, using the standard response. We prefer to handle our own internal affairs, but surely some general information, Kixara pressed. Your territory is enormous, larger than the hegemony and trade union combined. How do you maintain control over such a vast region? The question hit closer to the truth than Grant was comfortable with. The honest answer was that humans maintained control through technology and methods that would terrify other species if they knew the details. Dimensional manipulation, temporal stabilization, and reality anchors that kept things from breaking through into normal space. Every species has different administrative methods. Grant said, we simply have effective coordination. What kind of coordination requires such secrecy? Kixara asked, and Grant could see the desperate need to understand burning in the young diplomat's eyes. Grant made a decision that she would later wonder about. Instead of deflecting the question, she leaned forward and spoke in a voice that carried just far enough for the Altarian to hear. The kind that keeps other species safe, she said quietly. The kind that handles problems most people prefer not to think about. Kixara's eyes widened. What kind of problems? Grant stood up and placed a hand on the young diplomat's shoulder. The gesture appeared friendly, but Kixara suddenly felt the strength in those deceptively normal human fingers. The kind that live in the spaces between stars, Grant said. The kind that eat entire worlds if they ever break free. The kind that your species has nightmares about without knowing why. Before Kixara could respond, Grant's communicator chimed with an urgent message. Her expression grew grim as she read the priority alert from Fleet Command. "Lieutenant, we need to depart immediately," she said to Stone. "Emergency protocols." As the human officers quickly left the bar, Kixara stood frozen, trying to process what she had just heard. Around her, the remaining patrons began talking in nervous whispers about human space and the things that might live in regions where even the star maps ended. Grant and her crew were back aboard the Pioneer within the hour. As the ship detached from Nexus Station and accelerated toward the edge of the system, Grant reviewed the emergency alert one more time. Deep space sensors had detected massive movement in Sector 12. Something was testing the dimensional barriers again. The first warning came from the Deep Space Monitoring Station at the edge of Hegemony territory. Sensor operator Vexnar was 3 hours into his shift when his instruments began detecting massive gravitational distortions in the void between galaxies. At first, he assumed the readings were equipment malfunction. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the database. Then the distortions began moving toward the galaxy. Within minutes, similar reports flooded in from monitoring stations across the outer rim. The trade union's long-range sensors detected dimensional rifts opening in empty space. The Zelthran Observatory Network registered temporal fluctuations that made their most advanced equipment scream warnings. Even the Void Merchants emerged from their dimensional hiding places to send panicked messages about tears in reality itself. Something was coming through from the spaces between galaxies. Something vast and hungry and ancient. Admiral Zethkaran of the Hegemony Defense Fleet stood in his command center, watching the tactical display with growing horror. The approaching objects were enormous. Each one was the size of a moon, but they moved with purpose and intelligence that no natural phenomenon could explain. Worse still, they seemed to exist partially, outside normal space-time, which made tracking them nearly impossible. "How many are we detecting?" he asked his tactical officer 67. "Confirmed contact, sir," came the reply, "but the dimensional interference makes accurate counting difficult. There could be more." "Where are they heading?" The tactical officer's voice cracked slightly as he answered. "Directly toward the core system, sir. Current trajectory will bring them into contact with inhabited space in approximately 48 hours. Zethkaran felt his scales turn cold. The core systems contained over 2 trillion beings across hundreds of worlds. If these objects were hostile, the casualties would be beyond calculation. "Signal the Emergency Council," he ordered. "All species representatives to convene immediately, and send a priority alert to the human border stations." The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 6 hours later, in the secure chambers beneath Nexus Station. Representatives from every major species gathered around the circular table while holographic displays showed the approaching threat in terrifying detail. The objects had emerged from dimensional rifts in the deep void. They appeared to be artificial constructs of some kind with twisted organic surfaces that pulsed with malevolent energy. Long-range scans suggested they contained massive internal cavities that might house billions of hostile entities. "These are the Devourers," said Quindal in a voice barely above a whisper. "I thought they were legend." "You know of these things?" asked Trade Union Admiral Bloxham. The ancient Zelthran's 4 eyes blinked in the complex pattern that indicated absolute terror. "Stories passed down from the old civilization?" Before the current galactic community existed, there were others. Entire species that built great cities and spanned thousands of worlds. They all vanished without trace. The story said they were consumed by things from the void between galaxies. "How long ago?" asked Hegemony Admiral Zethkaran. 300 years. Quindle replied, "The same time that humans first appeared in our region of space." A chill ran through the assembled representatives as they began to understand the timeline. Humans had arrived in galactic civilization exactly when the previous civilization had mysteriously vanished. They had immediately claimed territory and warned other species not to approach their borders. They had been conducting mysterious operations that extended across multiple dimensions. "Send a message to Human Command," ordered Admiral Zethkaran. "Tell them we need immediate assistance." The response came back within minutes. It was brief and unsigned, but its implications were staggering. "Fleet deployment already in progress. Recommend immediate evacuation of all civilian populations from core systems. Human vessels will engage the threat at maximum range. Do not approach the combat zone under any circumstances." Before anyone could ask questions, the tactical displays began showing new contacts emerging from the direction of human space. These ships were unlike the vessels that occasionally visited galactic stations for trade and resupply. They were massive warships with hull configurations that seemed to shift and flow as if they existed, partially outside normal reality. Admiral Kevin Stone stood on the bridge of his flagship Liberator, watching the Devourer fleet approach through fold space. Around him, his crew worked with the calm efficiency that came from years of training for exactly this scenario. The bridge displays showed not just normal space, but 17 different dimensional layers where the enemy ships cast shadows across reality itself. "All fleet elements, report ready, Admiral," said his tactical officer, Captain Ellen Hayes, who had been promoted from her exploration. "Command when the emergency began. Enemy force composition," Stone asked. 73. "Devourer world ships," Hayes replied, reading from multiple sensor arrays. "Each one is approximately 12 kilometers in diameter and appears to house between 1 and 5 billion individual entities. They are approaching on 17 different dimensional planes simultaneously." Stone nodded grimly. The Devourers were an ancient enemy that humanity had been fighting for over 3 centuries. They came from the void between galaxies, consuming entire civilizations before retreating to digest their prey in the darkness. The last time they had appeared, they had devoured the previous galactic civilization completely. That was when humanity had first learned of their existence. Human deep space explorers had found the ruins of consumed worlds and detected the dimensional signatures of the retreating Devourer fleet. Earth's governments had made a decision that would define humanity's role in the galaxy for centuries to come. They would stand guard. While other species built trade networks and diplomatic alliances, humans had quietly constructed the largest military force in galactic history. They had developed technology that could operate across multiple dimensions. They had built containment grids and reality anchors and dimensional barriers that kept the spaces between galaxies sealed. For 300 years they had maintained the watch, hunting down individual devourers that tried to infiltrate normal space, fighting battles in dimensions that other species could not even perceive, keeping the ancient enemy contained in the void where they belonged. But now the Devourers had returned in force. The barriers were failing, and 73 world ships were approaching the galaxy with billions of hungry entities, ready to consume every living thing they encountered. "Signal the fleet." Stone ordered all vessels to combat formation, dimensional weapons to full power. "This is not a patrol mission anymore. This is the war our ancestors prepared us to fight." The human fleet moved to intercept the Devourers at the edge of the galaxy, where empty space stretched between star systems. Here the battle would not endanger civilian populations. Here humanity could use weapons that would terrify their galactic neighbors if they knew such things existed. The first engagement lasted 17 minutes. Human ships phased between dimensions to attack from angles that normal physics could not account for. Weapons that manipulated space-time itself tore through Devourer hulls that had consumed entire worlds. Reality anchors prevented the enemy from escaping into fold space where they might scatter to attack multiple targets. When the battle ended, 73 world ships had been reduced to expanding clouds of exotic matter. Billions of Devourer entities had been sent back to the void between galaxies where they belonged. The human fleet regrouped and began the long process of checking for survivors and reinforcing the dimensional barriers. Admiral Stone sent a single message to Nexus Station and the assembled galactic representatives. "Perimeter secure. Sleep well." In the days that followed, different species tried to process what they had witnessed. Long-range sensors had detected energy signatures beyond their ability to measure. Gravitational distortions had been visible across half the galaxy. The human fleet had engaged an enemy that existed across 17 dimensions and won a complete victory in less than an hour. Ambassador Zethkar sat in his quarters aboard Nexus Station, staring at the galactic map display. The empty sphere that marked human space no longer looked like a gap in the charts. It looked like what it had always been, a shield between civilization and the darkness that waited beyond the edge of known reality. Young diplomat Kixara had been right to ask questions. But she had been wrong about what the answers would reveal. Human space was not hidden because they were secretive or isolationist. It was hidden because it extended into places where ancient nightmares waited to devour entire worlds. It was hidden because humanity had voluntarily taken on the responsibility of fighting monsters in dimensions that most species preferred to pretend did not exist. The galactic maps ended at human space because beyond that point the charts belonged to things that ate civilizations, and for 3 centuries humans had been standing guard in that darkness, making sure the monsters stayed where they belonged. Now, when junior diplomats asked why the star charts had gaps, the senior staff would tell them the truth. Some borders were not meant to mark territory. They were meant to mark the edge of the safe universe. Beyond those borders, humans kept watch so that everyone else could sleep peacefully under familiar stars, never knowing how close the nightmares had come to breaking.